Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
As we should all be used to, we begin with a little bit of a quiz, a little trivia contest, although certainly it is not trivial. The next holiday is obviously Pesach, coming up around the corner. We're leaving Shabbat out of these equations, because that would always be the correct answer. But following Pesach, what holiday comes next? Oh, Lag BaOmer is a wonderful question, a wonderful guess. Technically, it's not a holiday, meaning that Lag BaOmer does not have a halakhic status officially, although we certainly commemorate it. What's that?
Pesach Sheni.
Pesach Sheni is another answer with a few liturgical changes. Shavuot is at the other end of the spectrum. After the counting of the Omer, we celebrate Shavuot. And all of you are forgetting that we're not done adding holidays just because the Bible was finished. Yes, the Tanakh finished, and we just talked about the final holiday in the Tanakh, which was, of course, just a month ago. The holiday of Purim, right, which is not in the Torah, but is the last holiday commemorated in the Tanakh. And then, of course, we get another holiday commemorated after the canonization of the Tanakh. Once the Tanakh is closed and no more books are being added, nonetheless, we still have another holiday officially added in. Hanukkah, absolutely. And then we go through a bit of a dry spell. We go through a very, very long time where we make a few adaptations to the liturgy, a few changes to some of the observance customs. Simchat Torah comes into its own as being a kind of separate holiday, although still technically Shmini Atzeret. We develop Lag BaOmer, we amend and adapt, but new holidays don't come again until 1948. Well, 1948 we get a slightly different holiday, which is, of course, Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. But that's not the holiday that comes next. Instead, it is the one that you mentioned, Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah, which is technically not the full name, Yom HaZikaron, HaShoah v'laGevurah, which is the full official name for the day, is the day of remembrance for the Holocaust and heroism. Although that wasn't the full name necessarily when it was first being established in 1949. And you may not have realized that because when it was established in 1949, it didn't come where it comes now in our calendar. Now, the holiday of Yom HaShoah comes on the 27th of Nisan, which this year is going to be April 17th and 18th. But that is not when it was first established. In 1949 and 1950, for the second year of its commemoration, it was held on a completely different day on, well, in the first year, December 29th, which was the 10th of Tevet. And you may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, the 10th of Tevet, Asarah Tevet, that sounds awfully familiar. Isn't that already a special day? And you are absolutely right. I could hear you saying it, you didn't even have to say it out loud. This is one of the fast days, which is part of the cycle of fast days throughout our year, commemorating some of the worst tragedies of our people. Officially, the 10th of Tevet was the day from the siege of Jerusalem under Nebuchadnezzar during the Babylonian conquest. And the rabbinate, the rabbinical courts within Israel in 1949 came to the conclusion that this would be the appropriate day to append our commemoration of the Shoah to. That we should add to our, well, misery, our sadness, our grief on this day that has already been on our calendar for more than 2,000 years. We should add in the grief that we feel from the destruction of the Shoah. Well, the Knesset disagreed. That is to say, the secular government said to the rabbinate, you know, that's an interesting proposal. Let's vote on it. And that day, along with many others, were considered. Now, you may have noticed when I gave you the full title of the official holiday name in our current incarnation, it is the Day of Remembrance for the Holocaust, the Shoah, and, did you remember that last word? Heroism, exactly. Heroism. Often we just shorten it to Yom HaShoah, which literally would mean Holocaust Day, rather than Holocaust Remembrance Day. But that final clause, v'laGevurah, and heroism, often gets lost in the calendar formatting. and as to say, to try and fit it onto the calendar square. For some reason, that seems to be lost. But that was an essential element to how the state of Israel, as represented by the Knesset, the parliament, wanted to commemorate, and why they felt a different date was necessary. In fact, the first date that was suggested that received the most excitement was the 14th of Nisan. Now, the 14th of Nisan is better known as the day before Passover. Who in their right mind would think that you would want to put a commemorative day on literally the day before Pesach? I was like, we're not busy enough, and we're not already in the holiday mood, we're not already in that joyous celebration sensibility? Why would we put it there? Well, it has to do with HaGevurah, because something very impressive happened on that day during World War II, which was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It was on that day when the largest single collective uprising of the Jewish people against Nazi oppression took place during World War II. And the new state of Israel wanted to remind everybody that the Holocaust, yes, was a tragedy for the millions who were murdered, but it was also a time when great heroism and active resistance took place. And they wanted to pick a date that would commemorate the active heroism, and not only those who were murdered and who died for their faith, certainly still heroic, but for the new state that was already had fought one war and that would soon fight many more, not exactly the theme that they wanted to exclusively emphasize. They wanted to also highlight the great courage of the Jewish fighters throughout the war, and the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising seemed like the logical time. But of course, the day before Pesach doesn't work. So they came to a compromise. You couldn't put it during Pesach because it's a holiday, the entire week of Pesach, and while either, and you would end up with one of two possible situations. Either Yom HaShoah v'laGevurah would overshadow the holiday of Pesach, which isn't a great thing, or, being honest with ourselves, with Pesach being Pesach and being hard to compete with the Exodus, Yom HaShoah v'laGevurah would be lost amongst the days of the holiday and be of quite insignificant status in the calendar. It needed to stand on its own if it was going to stand. But where to put it? Well, they ended up, in a sense, splitting the difference. As I mentioned before, we also have the 5th of Iyar, the Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, and the day before that, Yom HaZikaron, the day that would eventually be established for commemorating those who had perished in defense of the modern state of Israel itself. And the compromise was to make it a week-ish after the end of Pesach, and a week-ish before Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, to sort of stand in between those two monumental holidays. And that is where Yom HaShoah settled on the 27th of Nisan, which, as I mentioned, is April 17th and 18th in this year's calendar. Notice the neat way that the Knesset came to this decision. First of all, with debate and discussion, but second of all, recognizing that it needed to stand on its own. Yes, it had been our custom to commemorate great tragedies throughout our ages on different days, often because they coincided with those days. And although the Shoah was more than any one single day, we wanted to make sure to commemorate that as well. But given the enormity of the catastrophe, to allow it to stand on its own, to allow it to have its own feeling, its own spirit, was essential. And to find a way to blend both the grief that we felt for the catastrophe, as well as the pride we felt for those who resisted so passionately, you had to find its own unique setting. Unfortunately, like I said, so often we have forgotten exactly why that date was chosen and what it is meant to represent. Thankfully, thanks to our men's club here at Temple Israel and FJMC, the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, that's the umbrella organization for the conservative movement, you should, if you are a TI member, be receiving in the mail a small candle. And this candle is for you to light on the Erev of Yom HaShoah v'laGevurah in order to remember the duality of this day. So please keep an eye out on your inbox. If you can't find it Any memorial candle will certainly work just fine, but let us know because we want to make sure you're on our proper mailing list. But allow yourself on the evening of the 17th to light a candle, to recognize that we are both memorializing those who perished, but we are also lighting a candle in honor of those who fought back, reminding ourselves that that fight continues, that we must make sure there is always a candle burning against the darkness. There has to always be that spark that will allow us to endure despite those who would do otherwise. And if you are at all able, you can then join the Holocaust Center, which is having a special program on the afternoon of the 18th, which I believe is at 6:30 p.m. Also, please keep an eye out for more information coming up about a special collective program being done by many different Jewish organizations, of which TI and the conservative movement are proud participants, of standing against anti-Semitism and hate. You'll be seeing more about that coming up. We just got the information, I believe it was last night or early this morning. So too late for the Shabbat handout, but it's coming, it's coming. But make sure that you do not ignore this little holiday tucked away. We could have simply said that the Shoah was such a tragedy that we will never think of it again, that our attempts to fight back were unfortunately unable to succeed, so why bother remembering them? But instead we said, no, this must stand, and it must stand by itself, so that we can stand with that memory and make sure that this will never happen again.